So, we are going over everything Ivan Demidov related. Any sort of Montreal Canadiens prospect discussion, we are going to go out there and discuss. Because, of course, it's the hot topic nowadays. There isn't really anything else to look forward to if you're a Montreal Canadiens fan. So, why not look forward to the future? Talk about guys that could be making their impacts known as potentially the best Canadiens draft pick since Guy Lafleur. Yeah, that was already a topic that we had talked about. But in this video, what we're going to do is go over to yet another interview done with Ivan Demidov with the MHL. Not the NHL, the MHL, his junior league in Russia. Because recent reports coming out of Quebec and North American-based media have gone out there and looked at some of these prior interviews, analyzed some of these comments, and went over some of the extra thoughts that Demidov has. Now, last time in this realm, we did go over an Ivan Demidov interview discussing how he would be okay with playing center. And I wanted to take that entire 9 minutes and 54 seconds in that video to talk about the center idea. Hey, did the Habs just draft their future number 1C over Nick Suzuki in the 5th overall spot? Could this guy be a center version of a Kirill Kaprizov or a Panarin or, I don't know, name your pick as to these really good Russian superstars who play on the wing? There are a lot of them. But when it comes to Ivan Demidov's other comments in these Russian interviews, there's a lot to go out there and talk about. And to help us out, we're going over onto danslescoulisses.com, translating this article from French into English, because what Felix Forget goes out there and talks about was how Ivan Demidov's injuries last year led to depression. Now, that's a very dramatic title, and I think it's a very heavy subject matter, but there's more to this article and these Demidov comments than just depression and injuries. Let's go out there and talk about some of these extra things here. This was actually posted onto Twitter by Habs on Reddit. It's a comment made by Demidov talking about how trash talk from rivals only motivates him. This is, of course, Demidov in his mindset, how he responds to criticism. It only motivates him, which is great. That's a nice comment to go out there and say, but I didn't really think that that comment in itself was enough to make a video about, oh, hey, Ivan Demidov says that trash talk motivates him. How crazy. But if we go over to this article over here and read more about what it is that Demidov talks about, the young man admits that for a while, the injuries that he had sustained prior to his NHL draft led him to depression, to the point where he no longer wanted to talk to anybody. It was even harder for him to deal with all that, considering that he was in his NHL draft year. He knew it was a defining part of his season, and seeing the injuries pile up took a toll on him. That's the part of injuries that we sometimes forget. Not only is it physically difficult, but there's also a mental component in it as well. And in Demidov's case, the timing of it meant that it had significant impact on his mental health. With that said, when he was on the ice, he knew how to assert himself. He admits that people's trash talk is a great source of motivation for him, and that if anyone ever picks on him, he won't be afraid to defend himself. I'm not trying to drop the gloves, but if your opponent is looking for you, you have to fight. He did it last year, which led to a free-for-all, but he admits he doesn't exactly have a great fighting technique. He mostly improvised, but he figured that he wasn't at the bottom of the pile, so he must have won. Maybe George Laraque will have to give him some lessons. Now, that's really funny. We had seen George Laraque giving fighting lessons to Matt Rempe, a conversation that I said was very concerning for the New York Rangers. And while some people might disagree, I do think that it's somewhat concerning that the Rangers are building this guy up as this big fighting brute. Either way, all Rempe talk aside, Demidov is in a spot where he has dropped the gloves a little bit, and he has been in those positions in the past. But even though it's not the major defining part of his game, it still is something that he's still willing to explore. Which is nice, at the very least. Now, at the end of this article, there is a conversation about Demidov and some comparisons that you could go out there and debate are there. Started out right here. In the same interview, Ivan Demidov says that he had chatted a little bit about a comparison made by his coach, Roman Rottenberg, who draws a parallel between Demidov and Evgeni Malkin. A comparison with which the youngster does not exactly agree. He's a center and he is taller than me. I like Malkin, but I have very little in common with him, except perhaps my vision of the game. I recommend that you read the entire interview, which really allows you to learn a lot about the young man. I like to see that he had the maturity to admit that he had to deal with mental health issues related to his injuries, though. In a hockey culture where guys have to be unstoppable machines, to see an 18-year-old with that level of maturity is indeed commendable. And it very much is, I would say, when it comes to Ivan Demidov and his willingness to admit that it hasn't always been so peachy clean for him as an NHL prospect and inevitable Montreal Canadiens draft prospect. This is a guy who, taking his time in the developmental scene in Russia, has really allowed himself to bolster up his career, his projection, and his talent level. But whether or not he compares similarly to a guy like Evgeni Malkin is totally your prerogative, and I'd actually go out there and agree with Demidov. I don't necessarily think that they play the same way. If anything, I'd say that Evgeni Malkin has a little bit more of a power element to his game. Like, when I think of Malkin at his absolute prime, I think of a player who just has his way with his opponent. And that sounds very sensual when I say it like that, but no, it's not. I mean, it's a very domineering style. Malkin, like, I think the clip that epitomizes him, in my mind, is that clip when he had that breakaway, and he started out the breakaway at the offensive blue line. He comes in on goal, and instead of making a fancy deke or whatever, he just power slap shots the puck on goal. He just hits it as hard as he can, and it goes in. Malkin can be some sort of a ballerina if you need him to be, but he also has great vision, great playmaking, and good goal scoring. He is a very versatile offensive player, but he's a bigger guy, he plays center, and he uses that size to his advantage. I'd say that Ivan Demidov is a little bit more cerebral. Like, he needs to be a little bit more picky with where he chooses to pass the puck, and the pockets of space that he decides to go into, because he cannot just power forward through guys like Evgeni Malkin can. Demidov has to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more slippery in order to create the offense that he does. I'd say that the vision is pretty similar. Like, they can both read off of guys extraordinarily well, read their opponents, read their teammates, and predict what needs to happen for offense to be created. But for Ivan Demidov, I'd say that he's a lot more of a tricky, on-the-perimeter kind of player, instead of Evgeni Malkin, who's not afraid to attack the middle of the net a lot more head-on. That's not something to say that Demidov is not capable of doing, it's just, you know, talent profiles, size profiles, positions, they change the way you see the game. Which is why it's such a big deal when we talk about how Ivan Demidov's like, yeah, I can actually play center. If you need me to do it, I can. Which is exactly why we made that video last time. If Ivan Demidov can take all the things that Nick Suzuki has, which makes him an effective #1 center, and apply that to his game, whilst carrying over that offensive production that we all know and love, that seems like the absolute best case scenario here for the Montreal Canadiens. And at the end of the day, if he's able to prove that he can do that at the NHL level, then I don't think there's any problem here for any Habs fan worrying about how far Ivan Demidov is going to project into the future. As if anybody is worried, right? Everybody seems to be on this guy's side, and they all seem to be on the Demidov hype train. It's a really packed ride here, not gonna lie. But at the end of the day, it's a ride that we're all excited to be on, and it's a ride that I don't think anybody's gonna be stopping to get off of anytime soon. Sorry, John Mayer, but at this point, we are not stopping this train. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Ivan Demidov, speaking about not only his, Malkin comparison, but also the other stuff too. The depression, the injuries, and how he bounced back. This is all in conjunction with the interview that we had talked about him playing center. So I think this goes hand in hand. I thought it would be appropriate to split up these videos because some of these articles were not linked together as well. So, I mean, whatever. It kind of makes for 2 separate videos anyway, and I think a lot of people are totally fine with eating all this stuff up. But for now, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Ivan Demidov and all of the extra stuff we had seen about him. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.